Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys, a former D1 Hooper, current high school coach, teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press, Michigan State graduate.
Yes!
We're going to throw some other stuff in there to make up for it. Detroit native, Renaissance High alumnus. And I'll think of some more for next week, but I'm gonna have a firm one down for the Game of Thrones listeners. I feel like this is like the like how Khaleesi had like 8 or 9 honorifics for a name, so I'm gonna have my honorifics down. Don't worry, y'all.
Movie connoisseur, chef connoisseur, like you got all these different options you can keep throwing out there. But
music guy, yeah, I've got a few.
Yeah, there you go. So Omari, the Pistons and NBA schedule has dropped. I booked my flight this morning for one of my trips to Detroit, but I got to know, how many of your flights, how many of your trips have you already booked, or you do that like a week out for every road trip?
Yeah, I'm going to hold off for now. If anything, I could probably get the hotels, but the Pistons, the way they do their schedule, sometimes they may leave like a day before or a day after a game, just depending on their practice schedule. And I don't want to go through the headache of booking flights and I have to call Delta and move stuff around. So I figured probably for the next few weeks or so, I'll get those flights booked down. But it's always exciting when the schedule comes out because you can sit down and map the next 6 months of your life out. So it's kind of funny. Like I know I saw some people on Twitter who were like, we're never going to play 82 games. We know it's going to be every team at least twice, this and that. For me personally, I'm just happy I can figure out what I'm doing in October, November, December. And it's a little bit different for a beat writer. So looking forward to doing that over the next few weeks or so as Pistons figure out exactly what they're going to do. That's
very interesting, right? Because a lot of people are like, oh, the schedule drop is overrated, but that literally is your life for 6 months when that schedule comes out, where you're going to be. You know, I've been listening to these other podcasts talking about Christmas Day games, and I actually thought about you today. I realized Detroit doesn't have a Christmas Day game, but I thought about you and like, I wonder what Omari's going to think if the Pistons are ever good enough to get a Christmas Day game and what you'll feel like having to possibly work, possibly be on the road for Christmas Day and the Pistons playing in the future.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bridge across when I get to it. I think Christmas Day games always sort of had that prestige to them. Of course, the NBA kind of owns that day from a sports standpoint. So, and unlike you, like I don't have, kids or anything. So it's not like, the kids are like, oh, Dad's not here for Christmas or anything. Like, no, I could fly out on Christmas Eve and come back after and, see my family at some point that weekend once that day comes. So, it's not a big deal now. Maybe one day it will be, but I think when the Pistons get that first Christmas game scheduled, it'll be exciting just from I'm covering a team that clearly has a lot of interest standpoint. So maybe it'll happen next season after. I guess we'll see. I don't want to get fans' hopes up too high, but we will see.
I'm pumped. I think I'm going to get to see 4 games this year. I only got to see 1 last year. I've been talking to you about it. Going to come out in November to Detroit. Going to try to get you out to Kansas and then make the swing up to the Nuggets game. We'll see if we can pull that off. And then I'm actually going to come back out in April for a back-to-back in Detroit whenever they play, I believe, the Heat and the Nets. So I'm excited to make a couple trips out there and see the Pistons play more this year. But with the schedule dropping, we thought this was a great time to go ahead and start talking expectations for the upcoming season. And we're going to do individual expectations, not team expectations, but individual. And, most of the time we talk Cade Cunningham first, but we're going to start with the 2020 draft class and Killian Hayes. So let's just start there, Omari. What do you think we are going to see from Killian Hayes this year? What do you think we need to see from Killian Hayes this season? What do you expect?
I think we need to see an assertive Killian, and I think we need to see him make some drastic improvements and some of just the deficiencies he's had on offense, whether it's shooting or finishing at the rim. I don't want to say it's a make or break season, but it is a season where a year from now he'll be eligible for an extension. And with Cade, Jaden on the roster, where exactly does Killian fit in? So I think he has to show that he can fit with those 2 guys. And really for that to happen, the biggest thing is just outside shooting. He's got to be able to knock down outside shots if he's open. He doesn't have to become Klay Thompson, doesn't have to become, just even a go-to guy. I think if you can pass, defend, and just knock down open shots, that basically makes you Derek White, Marcus Smart type, and that goes a long way. So really just knock down shots, be a little bit more assertive on the offense, show that the work he's put in over the last 2 years is beginning to pay off.
I did a little bit of stat stuff. Lonzo Ball is a comp that I've thought about a little bit with Killian Hayes. After his first 2 years, which were similar age with Lonzo Ball. He had played 99 games, 10 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, 32% three-point percentage, but he was taking 5.3 attempts. But in his next 3 seasons, 153 total games, that three-point percentage did jump up along with the attempts for Lonzo Ball. So I'm interesting, like there is some precedence there. The one note that Wes put into the notes was that Lonzo was already taking more attempts. So what can we reasonably expect from Killian with his three-point shot, Omari? Because I don't know that he's going to go from the attempts he's having right now to 5, 6, 7 attempts a game. What do you reasonably think is fair for just the sheer number of attempts we can see from Killian Hayes from 3 this season?
It's interesting because I like the Lonzo comparison for Killian. It's what I've written about and I've used in the past, just from the standpoint of Lonzo came in. The playmaking was evident in college. The defense, he's been a plus defender throughout his career. But the jump shot didn't really translate from college. Biggest difference between Killian and Lonzo as far as when they were teenagers is that Lonzo shot pretty well when he was in college. So I think it was maybe a surprise for some that he shot poorly early in his career. And he has some issues with his mechanics that, I think stood out to some scouts at the time. Killian, he's not going to get up to 6 or 7. I think, for him to go from almost a non-shooter to a gunner over the space of one summer, that's not something we see too often in the NBA. But if he could get 3 up per game, 3.5, somewhere in that 3 to 4 range, I think that's the minimum, honestly. I think if he's only taking 2, it's okay, are we really going to close out hard on a guy who's only going to take one more shot from 3 after the first quarter? Probably not. I think he needs to get 3 or 4 per game. He needs to show that he's going to take those shots and that he can knock them down at a decent clip as well. We become a 40% shooter next season, probably not. But I think that you want to see him get at least to 32, 33, even 33. I think would make a pretty big difference compared to where he's been previously, where he hasn't really cracked that 30% threshold the way you would want him to. Bryce, you say Lonzo. Do you think that Killian already has sort of the command of the game that we kind of saw from Lonzo? Because even when he was in college, people talked about the way he moved the ball in transition and everything. We've seen Killian passing into half court, but do you think he can kind of be that transition guy as well?
Yeah, that's why I like the comparison. You brought it up with what you've done in the past is they were thought of these primary creators that needed the ball in their hands, and that's what they were going to do, run an offense. And then obviously with Lonzo, it didn't end up being that. With Killian, in my opinion, it looks like it's not going to be that, but I think he can still flash that passing in other ways without just being the primary creator for a team. He can do it in transition. You can still run ball screens for him. If he can get that shot, force closeouts, now he can attack and make those nice reads and passes. So that's why I like that comparison. I just don't know that Killian ever gets to the volume of three-point attempts that we've seen now from Lonzo Ball, let alone the three-point percentage. Now, it was interesting. Wes looked this up while we were recording. Killian did shoot 39% from 3 on 4 attempts in his final season in Germany. So there is a little bit more history there with the three-point shot than what I realized. I don't know if you knew that stat or not, but maybe that gives people a little bit more confidence in what may develop over this season and the next couple.
Yeah, I think the thing with Killian, and even beyond that, his touch when he was in Europe seemed like it may have been a bit better than it's been in the NBA, and the footwork as well. So he came in sort of with the tools where you could kind of hope to project him as being a good outside shooter at some point. I thought it was interesting last season. We really didn't see him take a lot of step backs compared to his rookie season when that was a go-to shot for him. Some of that may just be the coaching staff trying to coax him into taking easier attempts rather than tough ones, which I think makes sense. You're not James Harden yet, so don't take the James Harden shot attempts until you can knock down the open catch and shoots. But for him, I just wonder what he's most comfortable doing, because that is a shot he's going to a lot and it didn't fall. But we see him sometimes to catch it and he's wide open and he doesn't always just take the shot immediately. He's always kind of thinking. So with him, just the way he processes the game, I'm just curious if he could break those habits next season, because he has good habits. He has good habits on defense, passing. Those things are fine. Dwayne hates the one-handed passes, but he can do those with regularity as well. It's just when it comes to him actually scoring the ball, it seems like he thinks a lot. He's trying to figure out exactly what he should be doing on each play.
So I know we're sitting here on Killian a lot, and we will get to Isaiah Stewart and Sadiq Bey in just a second, but I have to bring this up because I've been sitting on this for a little while, Omari. I feel like people's go-to with Killian is he's only 21 years old. He's only played 92 games. He's definitely going to get better. And my pushback, Omari, would be that hasn't always been the case with players. Like some players don't continually get marginally better year after year. We've seen guys who like they've essentially come into the league, not gotten any better and flamed out. Do you agree with that? Is it possible that Killian doesn't get any better? Do you think it has to mean that he still has more in him because he's only 21, because he's only played 92 games?
No, I'm not saying this is true for Killian, but some guys just don't have it. Some guys get drafted and whatever they showed in college or overseas just doesn't translate, or they get hurt. Dante Exum came in, and I remember some Westbrook comparisons because of the athleticism and injury stats above it, and he just couldn't figure out the rest of his game to stick around. Or we saw Dennis Smith Jr. here. Another guy was good in college, came into the league, and just couldn't figure it out. I mean, age is age. I think if you look at any player's growth curve, like obviously if you're 20, 21 years old, you still have a lot of growth ahead of you. Some guys don't figure it out. I think in the NBA, you really have to have at least two things you do really, really well to stick around. You can look at a guy like Duncan Robinson, shoots the ball really well, but in the playoffs, you got to do, even a knockdown shooter like him, you got to bring a little bit more. You can't be a turnstile on defense, or else teams are going to play right off the floor. And with Killian, it's even tougher, I think, because he is a lead guard. Like he's 6'5", he defends well, he passes well. I just think it's really hard if you're not defending multiple positions. Like Killian can defend 1 through 3, but for most teams, probably more 1 through 2. I don't know if you want him on a guy who's 6'8". He's got to give a little bit more. So again, like I said it on the pod before, I don't think he has to make a super dramatic leap to become a reliable rotation player. He just has to knock down threes. If you can knock down open threes and you already have the defense and the passing, you probably don't need a lot more for him just to be able to play him 20 minutes a night, right? Like I think most teams could use a guy like that. It's just with Killian, because he was a 7th pick, I think people probably expect a little bit more. And I think we're at the point now where you probably adjust your expectations a bit based on what we've seen so far.
Speaking of expectations, let's give it the Pistons Pulse projected stat line for Killian Hayes, Omari. Let's go through them stat by stat. How many points per game do you expect from Killian Hayes next season?
I think 9 points is probably like the highest I would guess. The ball's not going to be in his hands as much with Jaden and Cade on the roster. And you just wonder how many shot attempts will he have, especially that he's not necessarily a gunner. For him, it's more so making the most of opportunities he gets and not, is he going to be a guy that's taking 12 shots a game? Probably not. So I think 9 points is probably reasonable for him. That's probably in line with where he's been, but ideally he does that and the efficiency is higher. Does that sound fair to you, Bryce? Do you think he could probably be a bit higher than that?
I'm definitely not going higher than that. I was thinking 8. I don't anticipate a huge jump in his points per game. So I was going to say 8. What about rebounds? He averaged 3.2 last season.
Yeah, he's probably going to be a 3 or 4 rebounds per game guy. I think he has the capability to rebound pretty well just because of his size and his strength. But he's also, most point guards probably aren't going to grab more than 4. For him, I think 3.5 is probably a pretty reasonable guess.
Agreed. Assists per game.
Yeah, he's been in like that 4 to 5 range. I think that's the hardest one just because you have Jaden Ivey and you have Cade. And you still have Corey Joseph on the roster as well. So I think Dwayne's going to have to figure out rotationally how to maximize those guys together, especially when Corey's probably the best shooter of the bunch. And, Killian up to this point has been close to a non-shooter, and we really don't know how well Jaden Ivey's going to shoot it as well. It's tough for Killian. It's really tough because you really don't know how many minutes are going to be there for him. But I think 5 assists, again, even if he's mostly running the second unit, as much as he passes the ball, I think probably 4.5, 5.5 assists is a fair range for him. I know he was around 5 last season, so I would expect it to probably be pretty similar.
I think 5 is a fair number. And then we talked a little bit about earlier, how many 3-point attempts do you think he'll actually average next season?
So he has not averaged more than 3 yet. He was close to 3 his rookie season. I'm going to say 3.5. I think his volume will be a little bit higher, really because it needs to be. Maybe he's not taking as many shots inside. Maybe the coaching staff is like, hey, you're Derek Fisher, right? Like you're knocking out open threes, you're taking care of the ball. Maybe Bo Williams, although Bo Williams could do a little bit more on offensive D-Fish, I think. But 3.5 sounds fair. I think the volume has to go up for him to, show that he's taking it seriously.
I'm not sure I'm as confident in the 3-point shot. I think he's going to stay below 3 with his 3-point attempts. I think he'd be closer to 2.5 than 3.5. So for Killian Hayes, I think our average is here about 8.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, 5 assists, 2.5 3-point attempts per game. Let's keep this moving to Saddiq Bey. And I want to start, you mentioned extension eligible for this draft class. You mentioned that with Killian Hayes. Saddiq Bey, I think, is going to be the one that's really interesting, Omari. And we've touched on this a little bit, I believe. But what do you think the Pistons are looking at a possible contract extension with Saddiq Bey a little bit from a year from now?
If you're opening the conversation up, you probably start at 15. And that's probably maybe a little bit lower than what he ends up getting. But I think the thing with Saddiq last season is that, and even his rookie season, he's been around a 40% overall shooter. And from an efficiency standpoint, we kind of talk about him maybe becoming like a Chris Middleton type. But if you're shooting 40% from the field overall, you're not going to be the second or third option. On a good team, that probably places you more as that three-point gunner that he was his rookie season. I would say the conversation probably opens around 15 right now. Think about Keldon Johnson. Keldon Johnson was better than Saddiq last year. He ended up signing like 3 years, $20 billion or something along the lines of that. Maybe if Saddiq's efficiency goes up, maybe you're looking at maybe 22, which would put him, you would confident inflation of the cap going up every year. Maybe that puts him in that Keldon Johnson range. But I would open it at 15. I think he still has the potential to become sort of like that go-to guy that we saw in the Spurs last season. He did get better as the year went on. But right now he's a career 39.9% shooter. And, I just don't know if you pay a guy more than 15 until he's proven that he can be more efficient.
I'm really interested as I looked at the per 100 possessions. So this isn't per game stats, Omari. This is per 100 possessions from his rookie to his sophomore season, his rookie to his second year. And he did play more minutes, but again, this is per 100 possessions. His field goal percentage went down. His 3-point percentage went down. His 2-point percentage stayed the same. Free throw percentage went down. Rebounds went down. Really, the only thing that went up, Omari, was his assists, which is really good. Like it almost doubled, which is a really good sign for Saddiq Bey and a really good jump. And his points went up a little bit just because his field goal attempts went up. So I think this is going to be a really interesting third year for Saddiq Bey in what kind of jumps we see. And you said it multiple times, what kind of efficiency we see. Especially, do you think he's going to be the number 2 option this season? What are your expectations for that? We'll talk about Marvin Bagley, Jaden Ivey, other guys a little bit later. Do you think Saddiq Bey's kind of, will he be second on the team in field goal attempts per game, I guess?
It's probably a fair expectation. I could see Bagley being number 2 in shot attempts as well if he comes in for a really big role. But I think so. I think we saw Saddiq step into that number 2 role last season when Jeremy Grant was out and he and Cade were the go-to guys. And I would think Saddiq, be a year 3, the work he's put in this offseason, he's going to have the green light again like he did last season. And I expect he'll be given free reign to just kind of figure things out like last season as well. So I think so.
All right, let's go to the Piston Pulse projected stat line, Omari. Last year, he averaged 16.1 points per game. How many do you expect him to average this season?
I'm going to go. So one, I do think his efficiency will be a little bit higher. I think especially having Jaden Ivey in the lineup, and if Ivey is effective right off the bat, that should open things up for Saddiq a little bit more. So ideally, he shoots a little bit better than the 35% from three shot last year. I'm gonna go 17 per game. I think he gets a career high. Shot attempts last year were around 14. I can see him being around 14 or 15 this year as well. Him and Cade is on number 2. So assuming his efficiency improves a little bit, I think that should probably equate to him averaging around 17.5 a game.
Okay, that's where I'm going to stay as well. I was kind of hoping maybe you were going to make a big jump because I think a lot of people think he's going to be a 20-point per game guy, maybe as soon as next season. I don't see it, but we're not going to disagree on this one. Let's stay right at 17. He averaged 5.8 rebounds per game last season. Where do you see him on the boards?
So the rebounding one is fun because that partially depends, one, on how the big man rotation goes.
I was going to say it depends how much time he plays at the 4. If he's on the floor with Bagley and Stewart and Duran all the time, there's not a whole lot of rebounds left, Omari.
Exactly. And it's like if he plays, let's say he plays equal parts 3 and 4, I can see him getting up to around 6 rebounds a game because he was a really, really strong rebounder. Looking at cleaning the glass, I think they listed him as a forward, and even instead of a wing and as a forward, his rebounding numbers were pretty good. I'll have to check real quick and make sure I'm not.
Well, while you're looking at, I'm going to go 5 while Omari's looking that up because, and it's not going down because I think all of a sudden he's going to get worse at rebounding. I think it's because of what Omari brought up. I think he's going to play a lot of time at the 3, and that's just going to hurt his overall rebounding stats. Now, he's going to be a really good rebounder for the 3 position. So even if it goes down per game, that's not necessarily a negative. That's just where I think he's going to end up based off the lineups I feel like we're going to see from Dwayne Casey and the Pistons.
As a forward, he was more of an average rebounder, which, again, it's a 6'8" guy who probably wasn't drafted to be a power forward. That's still solid. Defensive rebounding wise, as a rookie, he played more of a wing role, and his defensive rebounding was actually highly above average. So I can see him being around 6, but I think a lot of it is how much of Noel do we see, how much of Duran do we see. Does that push the deep board to the 3, in which case maybe he's probably closer to like 4.9, 4.8. So that's a tough one to answer because it really does depend on how the rotation shakes out. But I think we're both probably within the 5 range.
And then assists, the final one here, he averaged 2.8 assists per game last season. Where do you see him at with assists?
I'm going to go 3.2. He made a big leap last year as a passer. Dwayne's talked a lot about getting him more involved as a playmaker, so I think the opportunities will be there. Again, you have a lot of guys who, will have the ball and are already good passers on this team. You have Cade, you have Corey, you have Killian, and then you have Jaden Ivey as well who's going to need the ball. So curious to see how many opportunities actually come around for Sadiq, but I think he could probably hover around 3 as well.
That's where I was at. I think he's going to plateau a little bit. Again, I don't think it's because he's not going to get any better or get worse somehow. I just think the opportunities, hopefully as this team gets better, he's not asked to do quite as much. So that's a stat line of 17 points per game, 5 rebounds a game, 3 assists per game for Sadiq Bey. I think that's a pretty good line for him, hopefully on better efficiency than what we've seen thus far. We are going to dive into the third member, the third first-round pick of that 2020 draft class before we go to break, and that was Isaiah Stewart. Obviously, most of the conversation, Omari, for Isaiah Stewart is around the three-point shooting. So I want to ask, should we temper our expectations on the volume of three-point shot attempts he takes this season? What's a reasonable expectation? And I just want to throw this out there. Al Horford made his jump as a three-point shooter from year 8 to year 9. In year 8, he took less than 1 attempt per 100 possessions. In year 9, he took 4.8 attempts per 100 possessions and shot 34% from 3 that season. So I don't know if we can expect that type of a jump from Isaiah Stewart or not.
I know with Al Horford, just the way the league kind of trended, and I'm not sure exactly which season his three-point volume went up, but it was around the time that the league as a whole began to take more threes. So I do think we'll see a big leap in his three-point attempts per game. I think kind of like last year where we saw Sadiq, he was, we saw him using his footwork a little bit more, kind of creating his own attempts, and everybody was like, oh no, like, why is he doing this? And then that was the plan for the season as well. Like, I think because Isaiah Stewart was a full-time 4 pretty much in Summer League, and he was, hoisting threes. That's not to say he'll be a full-time 4 next season, but I think as far as him taking threes, I think the team is at the point where they're ready to see him take those a lot more in-game. So I would guess Isaiah Stewart's probably been like below 1 3 per game so far, but I think we'll probably see him get closer to 3 next season. I'm going to guess between 2 and 3, so like 2.5 per game.
I think that's a reasonable jump. I guess I hope fans aren't expecting him to be taking 5 a game or something like that. Like that would just be a ginormous jump in one season. Like I think we may get there eventually. There may be a progression to that. The other thing I'm really expecting to see is him become known even league-wide for his switchability. I'm really excited to see that, Omari. I know we talk about it, we know about it in the Pistons community, but I'm interested to see that league-wide and the respect he's going to get there. So let's go ahead and go to the Pistons Pulse projected stat line. Last year, Isaiah Stewart averaged 8.3 points per game. What do you think he's going to average this season?
Again, it kind of comes down to the big man rotation because they're so loaded up there. I could see his points per game dipping slightly, especially if he's spending more time outside the paint and it's a lot more reliant on how many threes he hits per game. Like if he's shooting like 36%, like that's one thing. But if he's taking more threes, but he's shooting like 32%, that's not the efficiency you want. But developmentally, you probably want him taking those shots anyway so he could get used to it. I can see him being around 7, 7.5 maybe. I think it won't dip a lot. I can see it being slightly lower just because there's more mouths to feed at that position. And I would assume whatever the coaching staff was running for Isaiah Stewart last season to get shots at the rim. Now you have Marvin Bagley. Now you have Duran, and you have better options. So I can see his points per game going down.
Interesting. All right, this will be the first one we disagree a little bit on. I actually have it going up to about 10 points per game. So we disagree a little bit there on Stewart. I think some of that may have to do with where we each stand on what we're going to see from Jalen Duren this season, which again, we'll talk about later. 8.7 rebounds per game last season, Omari. Where do you see the rebounds? This kind of plays into that same conversation we've had thus far.
Yeah, I think the rebounds will stay pretty consistent. I can see them being around 9. Because how many strong rebounders do the Pistons have? Marvin Bagley is a good rebounder. Olenik's solid, for his size. Curious to see how much we see Nerlens and Duren early on. So I'll see him hovering around that 8.79. I think that's probably pretty steady.
I agree. I could see a plateau there. And then 1.1 blocks per game last season. Where do you see the blocks going?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one because if he's playing more forward, he's probably going to block less shots, right? So again, like I feel like I'm being really conservative when I say this for Isaiah Stewart. I'm probably going to think it dips slightly as well, just because I see him playing along the perimeter a bit more than he did last season. So those opportunities may not be there. So he may be 0.8, 0.9, but the defensive metrics still very strong.
Yeah, that's what's interesting, right? The defensive metrics, just in terms of him protecting the rim, which, includes more than just blocking shots, are really high on Isaiah Stewart. And I don't know that that's necessarily going to change. So I could see him staying right around 1 block per game as well. So that is the 2020 first round draft class: Isaiah Stewart, Saddiq Bey, Killian Hayes. When we come back from this break, we're going to dive into the 2021 draft class, obviously starring Cade Cunningham, the second round pick Isaiah Livers, and then a non-2021 draft pick, Marvin Bagley III.
All right, hey, Carlos, just a quick idea. How about if I say, hey, this is Sean Windsor, and you say, hey, this is Carlos Morales, and I'll go, and then we'll go back. You want to try that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, you ready?
Yep.
Hey, this is Sean Windsor.
And this is Carlos Benares.
And we are the team behind Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean, where we are going to talk about, you guessed it, sports, but lots of other stuff. Like what, Carlos?
Oh, we're going to talk about your favorite subject, Sean, food. Probably more food. Arts, culture, sports, TV, movies, you name it. If it's happened in Detroit, we're going to talk about it.
And sometimes we're going to have guests in who obviously know a lot more than we do about just about everything. But we're going to have some Free Press journalists to talk about big stories, folks from the sports world. We're going to be out every Thursday. You can find this podcast wherever you find your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We hope you'll join us.
We're back. And we're going to dive, as far as our player predictions here, into the player that, I think everybody is probably going to have the highest expectations for obvious reasons, Cade Cunningham. This is interesting because Cade, like, statistically was pretty good overall last year, but you can kind of, peel the fat a little bit, and you can kind of see areas where he could definitely improve in, whether it's turnovers or just overall efficiency. So Bryce, how much better, if you had to put a percentage on how much better you think Cade would be next season, what would that percentage be?
Okay, so this is the one guy I'm going to say that I'm expecting a major leap from. I have very high expectations for what Cade's going to do. And I'm not going to go into all of this, but we looked at Luka Doncic and LaMelo Ball, and Wes actually did the average percent change from their rookie season to their sophomore season in the NBA, and then took the average. If you do that and then equate it to what Cade Cunningham did last season, this is what you would expect Cade's numbers to be: 23 points per game, 6.4 rebounds, 7.6 assists, 43% from the field, 32% from three, 94% from the free throw line on 3.1 free throw attempts. If Cade Cunningham does that, I'm going to be very happy with the season that we see from Cade Cunningham. That is a major jump and a major leap that we're talking about. And ironically enough, his best month of the season, which was March, a 14-game sample size, he averaged eerily close to those numbers: almost 23 points a game, almost 6 rebounds, 7 assists on 48% from the field, 32% from three, 83% from the free throw line, and 3.3 free throw attempts a game. So there's a history, at least a 1-month sample size, of him putting up those type of numbers. So I don't think it's crazy to think it can happen and maybe even expect it to happen.
I think it'll be a pretty good leap as well. I think 32% from three would be disappointing. I think I think in today's NBA, especially, some of the threes he'll be taking, whether pull up or slide step or whatever, you probably want to see him closer to 35, 36, which I think Lillard's career mark's probably around 37. So, guys who have the ball in their hands, I think just a difficulty at threes. You're probably not going to shoot 40% unless you're, Steph Curry or whatnot. But I want to see him get up to 35 or 36. I think 32 would be disappointing. But beyond that, I think he will eclipse 20 points per game. Whether it's 23, whatever, I think he'll be in that 20 to 25 range. I think that's a fair expectation because he did it for a good portion of last season. And he really had help last season as well. So you would hope with Ivy here, with Saddiq maybe being a little bit better, maybe Killian spacing the floor a little bit more, Cade could get better quality shot attempts, and that'll help him efficiency-wise, but also points per game wise. And I can certainly see him being around 7 assists per game. You just reduce the turnovers a bit. I think he's a guy who could average 7 or 8 assists. Honestly, he's a pure point guard. I don't see why he wouldn't be able to eclipse that. 6 rebounds, maybe 2 combined blocks and steals. That would be a very solid sophomore leap. I think everybody would be happy with that.
Yeah, and the thing with Cade is we're talking about this other influx of talent, or at least young talent that's coming in, Omari, but none of those guys are taking the ball out of Cade Cunningham's hands, right? Like he's not losing opportunities, so his usage isn't going to change. We talked about Isaiah Stewart. Maybe his numbers go down a little bit, even if his impact doesn't, just because other guys are going to get opportunities. Cade's going to get his opportunities to shine, and we all know that. So none of that is going to affect him. Another area I'm interested with Cade is what he does defensively. I don't know that I expect his defense to take a leap, Omari, because if his offensive numbers take a leap that we're talking about, I think it's too much to expect to see his defense do the same. So if he's a similar defender next season, which is, I would say, average. I think other people are higher on his defense than what I am. But even if he's just right around average next year, that's okay for me. Let him take this huge offensive load and jump, and then that defense can come along slowly. He can't do it all on both ends of the floor.
I agree. And I think we probably won't see Cade maybe become a true plus defender until the Pistons eventually get maybe that second
Agreed, 100%.
Scorer next to him. Maybe Ivey becomes that guy in a couple of years, and Cade's like, okay, I don't have to exert as much energy on offense, so I could pick up those tougher defensive assignments, which he has the tools to do at 6'6", 7'1" wingspan. And he reads the floor really well. Like, he's got everything he needs to be a plus defender. It's just, from a load standpoint, it's hard to do both of those things. And we kind of saw him wear down, as games went on that season as well. So that's going to sap your energy on defense as well. 100%. I think for Cade being a good defender, it's less anything he needs to work on and more just the Pistons putting him in a place where he can do that. Like last season, I just think how many rookies are good defensively for one? Like probably very few. You probably kind of one hand the number of rookies every year who are genuine plus defenders, which is why Herb Jones got first team all rookie votes last year because it's hard to do. So I think Cade would get there next season. It just highly depends on how good his teammates are.
So let's go to the Pistons Pulse projected stat line. Talked a lot about it. How many points per game? You said over 20. How many points over 20?
I'm going to go 21. I think 21 feels like the conservative estimate.
All right, I'm going to say 23. So that'll average us out at 22 points per game for Cade. How many rebounds? He averaged 5.5 rebounds per game last season for the year.
I still think he'll be around 6. I don't expect it. I don't see why that would go down. But I also don't know if he's going to be a guy who's averaging like 8 per game, like a Luka. Which, I mean, he could get there. I just don't know if he's going to improve that significantly. So I think he'll be around 6.5. That's
where I had him at 6 rebounds per game, and then assists per game. Last year, he was at 5.6 assists per game.
I can see that going up to 7.6. Like he really is a point guard on the ball, be in his hands. Just from a playmaking standpoint, probably no way is going to threaten his opportunities to get to that point. And as he reduces turnovers, I think 7.5 is probably the range I see him being in next season.
I was going to say 6, but I'll say 6.5 just to make the average easier for Wes as he types this in. So Cade Cunningham next season, the Pistons Pulse projected stat line, 22 points per game, 6 rebounds per game, 7 assists per game. That would be a heck of a sophomore year for Cade. I think that would leave Pistons fans plenty happy with the number 1 overall pick from 2021. But let's talk about the second round pick from that same draft class, Isaiah Livers, a young man who I have high expectations for, Omari, maybe too high of expectations. This is your chance maybe to calm me down a little bit on Isaiah Livers, or are you seeing some of the same things with your expectations for him next season?
I got to see how high you are on him, because I'm high on him too, but it might be 2 different levels of high. No, I think he's going to come in and he's going to do what he did at Summer League, be very sound defensively as far as his rotations and, being able to maybe do a bit more on that end than you would expect a 6'7" wing to be able to do as far as some of the rotations he had, the blocks, just being a really good, just like keeping everybody on a string in a way, being able to read what his teammates are doing, keep guys in line, whatnot. Very high on him on that end. I can see him shooting 37, 38% from 3, maybe even higher. Like, I don't want to undersell his shooting at all, but I think he'll be a plus on that end. And we'll see. Like, I'm curious to see how many minutes he gets. Like, he may be a guy that the coaching staff just has a really hard time sitting him because he's making few mistakes. He's facing the floor. He's playing defense, and the team doesn't have enough of those players. So I'm high on him. Like, I don't know. Like you said, you're high on him. I don't know if he's averaging like 16 a game, but like I absolutely see him being a guy who's going to have a very healthy stat line all the way across the board.
No. I'm not going to 16 points a game.
Okay.
I do want to say 42% from three on 3.4 attempts last season, small sample size. In college, 36% on 1.5, 43% on 3.5, 40% on 4.9 attempts, and then 43% on 5 attempts in college. That was freshman through his senior year. So there's a history there of him being a very, very efficient 3-point shooter. Wes put in some very interesting notes. So I just want to throw these out there and get your reaction to it, Omari, because I think what he's trying to, I don't know if he actually believes this or just like, hey, here's some things to think about. He's only played 19 games in his career. Does he have to beat out Hamidou Diallo, or is it Hami have to beat out Isaiah Livers? He's only played in essentially low-pressure games and a few summer league games. So has he really proven it on an NBA floor yet? Do any of those things, I don't want to say concern you, but make you go, okay, like that's a good point. Maybe we are expecting a little bit too much from Livers.
I would think that because Livers can shoot, and the Pistons were like 27th in the league in shooting last season, 28th, toward the bottom of the pile, that there's probably going to be a natural bias toward giving Livers those opportunities just because he is giving you something that you need more of. And you need what Javi gives you too, which is energy. He can be a good defender, and he's a guy that can kind of just create things out of nothing, whether it's putbacks or cutting. I think there's always a place for those types of players. You're also going to be getting some of that from Jaden Ivey as well. And I kind of wonder, well, can you play Jaden Ivey and Hami together, or is that maybe a little bit too much of the same thing? Whereas there's not a lineup where Isaiah Livers doesn't fit in. So just from an opportunity standpoint, I think it probably lends itself toward Isaiah eventually securing his spot in the rotation pretty solidly, where maybe Hami has to show a little bit more to secure his spot.
Let's go to the Pistons Pulse projected stat line. He averaged 6.4 points per game last season. Again, just 19 games. How many points per game for Isaiah Livers this season?
It's not like, again, he played 19 games last year, and a lot of that depends on his role. But I would assume if he's getting up about 4 threes a game, which I think is realistic, he's shooting around 38, 39%. He's getting points elsewhere. Maybe he's getting to the line here and there and whatnot. I can see him averaging like around 8, 9 points, but on pretty good efficiency overall.
Yeah, that's why I was going to go 8 points per game. I don't think it's anything crazy, but if he hits 2 threes a game, something around there, that's 6 points, gets a backdoor cut, something like that. 3 rebounds per game last year for Isaiah Livers.
I can see his rebounds going up. I can see him being around 4 or 5. I think he's a pretty good rebounder for his size.
So I'll say 4 rebounds as well. And then he averaged 0.7 steals per game.
I'm going to bump that up to 1. Just admit it's going up, so probably 1.2, 1. He's got pretty good hands, so I can see that being above a steal per game.
1 steal per game for Isaiah Livers. So I think while we're high on him, we also appreciate kind of it's just the floor spacing. It's his malleability to play with different lineups is really what excites us. He really is that true kind of role player because we're not going crazy with the stat line of 8 points per game, 4 rebounds per game, 1 steal per game expected for Isaiah Livers. Now, someone who was not a member of the 2021 draft class, but we lumped him in with these two, is Marvin Bagley III. I feel like expectations are all over the board for Marvin Bagley III, starting with the contract, which national pundits hated. Some local fans didn't like it. I know West is super high on Marvin Bagley III. Some people didn't even want to give him a contract at all this offseason, Omari. So we don't have to get into all of that. What are your expectations for Marvin Bagley III? I just want to lead off with, I think our Marvin Bagley III will be in the starting lineup on opening night with Isaiah Stewart.
My guess is also that he starts. The Pistons are clearly very high on him. I believe in him. We'll give him the opportunity. And he played really well last season. So I think you just look at their roster and Marvin just giving you rebounding athleticism, interior scoring. He serves a pretty important role. So I think with the Pistons last year, he was around 15 and 7. And I think that's probably where he's going to stick. I can see him averaging about 15-7, 15-8 per game.
Did you buy a dog, Omari?
No, I did not. I live in an apartment complex where everybody seemingly has a dog. So there's always dogs out in the courtyard. Like there's this lady who has like 2 young puppies I've been seeing around. So that's just kind of, they call me Midtown, though. Everybody in Midtown has a dog. So I don't have a dog, but there's always dogs barking.
I just heard this was the first time we had the dog barking in the background. So I thought maybe you had got one and you didn't let us know. That would have been something that would have been something to add to the intro. I just want to throw these out there. with the Marvin Bagley III contract. Average annual value ties in for 125th in the NBA with Wendell Carter Jr. Right around the same place as guys like Oubre Jr., Portis, Boucher, Nance Jr., Dwight Powell, Mo Bamba, Daniel Gafford, Christian Wood, Dorian Finney-Smith. Mitchell Robinson got $15 million a year. So I just wanted to throw those numbers out for fans, just kind of where that number was. But let's go ahead and go, because we both agreed that we think he's going to end up starting. And I am interested to see how that combination works in the starting lineup, but I am excited to see it. Let's go to the Pistons Pulse projected stat line. You were right. He averaged almost 15 points per game last season, 14.6. What do you expect from Marvin Bagley III this year?
Yeah, if he starts, I mean, like it could go up, honestly. He had really good chemistry with Cade. You know that their pick and roll is going to be good. You know Marvin's going to clean up a lot of shots at the rim. He's a guy who could even function as a go-to scorer to an extent, just because of his touch around the rim. I can see him getting up to around 16, maybe. I think just in off season with the team and those tendencies, everything. Pistons are clearly investing in him and believe that there's more that he could show. Like 16 feels like it just sounds high, but given how good he was last season, I don't think that's outside the question at all. I think he could definitely be a 16 points per game scorer.
No, I'm at 16 as well. I think he's going to be the third leading scorer on the team, and that puts him right there, right? What did we say Sadiq Bey was going to be at 17? So that's right there with Marvin Bagley III. I don't think they gave him that contract not to utilize him and give him an opportunity. And it's not because he's so good defensively. So if you're going to give him a contract, keep him around, you might as well give him opportunities to go get buckets and see how good he can be at that. So I'm at 16 points per game as well. 6.8 rebounds per game last season for Marvin Bagley III.
I'm going to go 7.5. If not 8, I think if he starts, let's say he starts next to Isaiah Stewart, combined, like you probably think they average around 17 or 18, right? So, if Isaiah's around, 8 or 9, I think Marvin's probably going to be in a similar range as well. So I would just go 8, but I can see him averaging a bit more than that.
Yeah, so I would say 8 as well. So we got Marvin Bagley at 16 points, 8 rebounds a game. I think that's pretty high expectations. I do think it's reasonable. And I do want to make a note, the stats we're throwing out are just the games with the Pistons. It doesn't include his games with Sacramento before the trade. And then I think he averaged just over a block per game. So how many blocks per game you think we're going to see from Marvin Bagley III?
Probably around the same. He's not really been a prolific shot blocker, but just being a 6'11" player near the rim, he's got to get some blocks. So around 1.2, 1.3, but I think that probably stays the same. It may go up just because he's playing more minutes, if anything.
I'm at 1 as well. So 16, 8, 1 block. Really interested to see what it's going to be fun to come back to these at the end of the season, see how close we were with all of them. We're going to have to bookmark this Google Doc, but we got to go to a short break right here. When we come back, we're going to dive into the 2 lottery picks from the 2022 draft class and the aforementioned Hamidou Diallo.
I'm Alyssa Robinson for the Detroit Free Press. When you wake up every morning, what's the first thing you do? Check your email? Me too. And when you sign up for our daily briefing newsletter, you'll get all the latest news sent directly to your inbox so you can wake up and be ready for the day. We also have newsletters about COVID-19 in Michigan, the latest entertainment headlines, as well as Woodward 248, a newsletter specifically for people living and working in Southeast Oakland County. And don't forget about automotive headlines and all the latest news from our Michigan sports teams. We have a newsletter for every personality and preference. Just head to freep.com/newsletters to sign up for any one of these great options and more.
Well, this one should be fun because you have the 2 lottery picks, Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren. And I mean, who knows what they're going to average, right? Like somebody could say, I think Jaden Ivey's going to average 27 points a game. And I'll say that sounds, pretty ridiculous, but who's to say? We don't know. We have nothing to go off of. So let's do Hamid first. So again, like we talked about Hamid a little bit already, but he's in a unique position where he's coming off of arguably the best season of his career. At the same time, he doesn't do the one skill that's most important for wings in the NBA, and that's shoot the ball, which means you have to really be good on defense. You got to provide other things. And he does those things, but maybe not as consistently as you would want. Bryce, what do you expect for Hamid sort of at the beginning of the season? Like, where does he fall into the mix on this team where you have all these mismatched guys that all bring something, and you would like to say that Hamid's going to come in and kind of build off of last season, but there's more competition for what he does as well.
I think he's out of the rotation to start the season, Omari. And, Wes put this stuff in the notes, and now it's got me thinking, like, maybe I'm overvaluing Livers. Maybe Hami's going to get the first opportunity, and then Livers is going to be the guy that has to bide his time and then gets his rotation once, if Hami doesn't prove it or whatever. But I believe it's the reverse, Omari. I think Isaiah Livers starts in the rotation. I think Hami eventually gets time. I just don't know where it's going to come from with some of these other guys on the roster. So I think he's going to get his minutes eventually, but I don't think it's at the start of the season.
I agree. I think Hami does get an opportunity at the start of the season. But when you actually go down the roster, you say, well, who gets flexed out? Because you don't think the rotation is probably going to get above 10 per game. Dwayne, like he'll go 11, but just looking up and down, you just know certain guys are going to play, and he's sort of on that cusp. So naturally, you think was going to be Livers or Hami. Realistically, it's just hard to think about either of those guys not playing. It feels, not that the NBA is fair, but it feels unfair to Hami that he's coming off of a good year. He put up really big numbers during the COVID stretch that the team went through where everybody was out except a handful of guys. And he does give you a lot of energy. He's a good cutter. He's great at transition. For a team that was starved for athleticism last year, he really did feel an important niche, but the team's not more athletic now, so that's not quite as valuable in this roster as it was last year because you have Jaden Ivey who does what Hami does and more. I'm just curious to see how Dwayne handles that one because I don't feel comfortable saying either of those guys would be out of the rotation. I feel like it really comes down to who plays better in camp. If Livers struggles in camp, he's not knocking out shots, like it's probably Hami, right?
Yeah.
On the other end, if Livers comes in and he's doing everything he did during Summer League, you look at it, it's like, okay, but Ivy's in the rotation, Cade, Killian, Corey, and Alec Burks, obviously, who can shoot. How do you flex a sixth guard in there? And you probably can't. I mean, I just don't see how that works.
Hami didn't exactly respond great to not being in the rotation at the start of last season. And how you played that dynamic is going to be interesting as well. Another guy who we're not going to talk about, and we haven't mentioned much, is Kevin Knox. What if Kevin Knox comes in and just shoots the lights out, Omari? As much as we talked about this team needing shooting, I know there's a small part of the fan base that thinks he's going to get minutes. So it's just going to be very interesting. And as we get closer over the next month to training camp, I know we're going to do a lineup episode where we talk about who we think is going to be the starting lineup, the second rotation, the closing lineup, the shooting lineup, all those things. And I think it'll really showcase how tough this is going to be for Dwayne Casey and his staff. So let's go right.
I would say this, though. It's a contract year for Hami, and we've seen players in contract years come out and show stuff that they never showed before. So Hami may come out and shoot 36% from three, and so did everything he did last year. It becomes a really competitive battle. So, I think it'll be fun if nothing else. It'll be a tough decision for the coaching staff, and those guys are going to have to show out in camp to separate themselves.
If he shoots 36% from three, then he is probably going to get on the floor, and he probably deserves to be on the floor and is going to provide great value. So let's go to the projected stat line. Pistons Pulse projected stat line right here. He averaged 11 points per game last season. This is going to be an interesting one. How many points per game for Hamidou Diallo this year?
I feel like the points have to go down, unless he is on his game every single night and he's clearly outplaying everybody. It's just tough to see with all the players in that backcourt that he gets that same opportunity. And I was also inflated last year because there was a stretch where people were hurt or had COVID, and he was putting up more points than he normally would. So I don't think he's probably going to be around 8 this season. So that sounds like a harsh decline, but just looking at the rotation, it's hard for me to see how he gets back to 11 unless he makes a drastic improvement in a few areas.
Yeah, I'd be contradicting myself if I said anything higher than 6 or 7 because I just don't see where he's going to get the minutes. And that's nothing against Hami. It's just who I think is going to get the minutes above him. So I'm going to say 7. He averaged 4.8 rebounds per game last season, but it's kind of the same thing. It's all dependent on minutes. So where do you think that goes?
It'll be around 4. He'll still be a really good rebounder for his size. He was one of the best rebounding wings last season. If you played Hami a game, he might average 7 rebounds a game, but he's probably going to be around 20 in the games he does play. So that probably puts him around 4.5 or 5.
I'll say right there at 4. And then he averaged 1.3 assists per game last season. How many assists per game for Hami?
Probably around the same. He's probably averaging around 1. He's more of a guy who creates stuff out of nothing, but you're not putting the ball in his hands. So I just don't see those opportunities being there for him. So he'll be around 1.
I agree, 1. So our Pistons Pulse projected stat line, 7 points per game, 4 rebounds per game, 1 assist per game, mostly due to, I what Omari and I feel like are going to be minutes per game for Hamidou Diallo, which could change. We could be completely off here. Maybe he does get those rotation minutes that we're expecting to go to Isaiah Livers, or maybe the coaching staff gets creative. We're going to start with Jalen Duren of the 2 lottery picks, and then we'll finish off with Jaden Ivey. Jalen Duren, I didn't compare him. I said there was a possible upside of Bam Adebayo. Bam Adebayo's rookie season, he only played 20 minutes per game, averaged 6.9 points, 5.5 rebounds, 1.5 assists in 19 games started. I would expect for me that's going to be similar for Jalen Duren. I know we're a little bit different. I think I'm lower on his rookie year impact, higher on his long-term impact. Omari, where are you at on expectations for rookie season Jalen Duren?
It really comes down to the role with a lot of these guys. I think the Bam comparison makes sense for him because Duren's going to have competition, and I'm just curious to see how much leeway he gets to be able to make mistakes as far as, is he boxing out consistently, things like that. Where the Pistons are in a position where they don't have to play him because you have Isaiah Stewart, you have Nerlens Noel, Kelly, Marvin. Obviously, you have some vets there who are very productive. A lot of that comes down to, and we'll learn a lot of this during training camp, kind of what do they expect from Duren and how much leeway will he have to go on the floor and make mistakes versus we're going to actually hold you pretty tight and we want to see you play mistake-free basketball to set the right habits because you are 18 years old. He turns 19 in November, but he'll be 18 years on the opening night. So stats-wise, probably not anything outstanding. I think his rookie season will be one where he's raw but has obvious gifts, and maybe toward the end of the year we start to see him put up some 17-6 or 18-9, those types of games where he starts to showcase it more as he gets more opportunity. But I don't think his stat line is going to be anything that jumps off the page. I think it'll be a case where you have to watch him and kind of see what he's doing to get a feel for how good he is.
I mean, as high as I am on him, he's very raw. Even people, I believe in him as a vertical lob threat, Omari, but he didn't get a lot of those opportunities last year at Memphis because he didn't have a point guard that could run the screen and roll with him. So there's some nuance even in that part of his game he has to get better at. I watched him run one of those highway screens that we called in Detroit that Isaiah Stewart's so good at, and Duren literally just ran down there and just forearm shivered the guy like it was a football game or something. There's nuance even to those things that don't seem like there are. So he's going to have to learn to get better in the ball screen and roll. So I think we're on the same page. I still think he may spend some time in the G League compared to you. We've talked about this. We don't have to go into all that this episode, but let's just go right into the stat line. The Piston Pulse projected stat line, points per game for Jalen Duren.
I'm going to go 5 points. I think he will, it'll kind of even out. You have garbage time games where you probably only get a layup or an alley-oop or whatever, and then he'll be having a game where he's playing 25 minutes and he's getting up to 10 or 11. So 5 feels about right for me. I just don't know if the opportunity is going to be there consistently for him to consistently score.
All right, yeah, I was going to say 6, so we're right there at 5.5. Rebounds per game for Jalen Duren. I know a lot of these are going to end up being kind of the same scenario.
Yeah, he wasn't an outstanding rebounder in summer league. He was kind of just okay. So I think 4. I think that might be the side of the ball where I would say he has the most work, but from a technique standpoint, he's going to realize, I'm not the supersized 18-year-old who could bully everybody, right? They're going to put a body on me every single time, and I've really got to technique-wise position myself to get those rebounds. Yeah,
he's got some work to do in that aspect. He's going to have to box out guys because he's not going to be able to just out-jump everybody. He can some guys, but not everybody. So I'm going to say 3 rebounds, and then blocks per game for Jalen Duren.
No, that's the area where, just from a raw athleticism standpoint, he's going to block some shots. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was 1.3, if it was just kind of weirdly high, but just him being able to read the floor and his wingspan and everything. I can see him being over a block per game for sure, even if the points and rebounds aren't that high. So I'm going to guess at least a block.
That's what I was going to say, a block per game, because I think he'll get something. He does have a nice foundation there as a rim protector, and I think he's going to be active and he's going to come in and get those things. So 5.5 points, about 3.5 rebounds, 1 block per game for Jalen Duren. And then we will finish off the episode with the number 5 overall pick, Jaden Ivey. I think this one is going to be even more interesting where we go with the stats. There's been Donovan Mitchell comparisons. I think that's probably your favorite. Just Donovan Mitchell's rookie season, he played almost 34 minutes per game, over 20 points, 3.7 rebounds, 3.7 assists. He started 71 of those games. Rookie Dwayne Wade which we had brought up on a previous episode just for like if he had that kind of rookie season, not comparing their games. 16 points per game, 4 rebounds, 4.5 assists, 56 games started. So where are we at before we just get into the actual numbers? Where are you at with the expectations for Jaden Ivey? First, do you think he's going to start Omari? Because I know that is a discussion with the fan base that maybe Alec Burks starts.
I think he starts just looking at how the Pistons handled Cade Cunningham and Killian Hayes. They kind of tossed them into the fire immediately. And granted, they did not join the team that already had 2 young playmakers, so maybe that logic doesn't hold with Jaden Ivey. But I do think he starts. I think he's going to come in and I think the Pistons recognize that he and Cade probably give the organization their best shot at having 2 homegrown superstars. So why not just let them figure it out from day one? I think he starts.
Yeah, I think he starts as well. I would be surprised if he does. Now, the one thing I wouldn't be surprised by Omari is if we see multiple games, if the Pistons are at least competitive, whether they're winning games or not. And we'll get to some of those projections over the next few weeks where he doesn't close games. I could see Alec Burks being in the closing lineup. And that's where it goes back to Isaiah Livers, where maybe that's where Livers ends up getting more minutes than Hami is. I see Livers being a better player in a closing lineup than Hamidou Diallo is. So I could see that with Alec Burks, Jaden Ivey, and I think that's going to frustrate some people, but I don't think that's the worst thing for Jaden Ivey. He's going to get plenty of minutes. He's going to get plenty of opportunities, and there will be games where he gets the opportunity to close, but there's going to be games where it's going to be Alec Burks. Let's get right into it. Let's go to the Pistons Pulse projected stat line with Jaden Ivey because we don't have anything to go off, obviously, from past seasons. The college stats don't really mean a lot. I'm really interested to see this. What are your expectations for Jaden Ivey points per game in his rookie season?
It's tough. I touched on it earlier, but it's the one thing that we know with Translate is his ability to get to the rim and ability to attack a transition and just absolutely destroy guys at half court because nobody can stay in front of him. I feel like 10 feels safe, right? Because it's like he's going to be able to score one way or another. We don't know if he's going to shoot it that well, but he will be able to get to the rim. And he might just get a couple buckets per game just in transition, whether it's, steal or whatever, outrun everybody. I could see him averaging more than that. If he told me a year from now that he averaged 14, I don't think that would surprise me. I think once you get to 16, that's when it's okay, that's best case scenario, right? But I think I'm probably in that 11 points per game range with him as a rookie.
I just want the listeners to know we didn't talk about this beforehand. We didn't put it in anywhere, but we're kind of in lockstep here, Omari. 14 was my high-end number for him, so it's not what I'm saying, but that would be my high-end. I was thinking 12. 12 was where I was at with points per game. And, if he hits 14, I'm going to be ecstatic.
I think 14 shows that he's knocking down threes at a pretty consistent rate.
And, or he found that mid-range floater game or something like that he didn't showcase in college that maybe he has or has worked on between college and the NBA season. If he's averaging 14, 15 points a game, he has really worked on something, one of those questionable scoring attributes, and that's going to be a really, really good sign. Rebounds per game. This one is interesting as well. He is a high-level athlete. He averaged almost 5 per game in his last season at Purdue. So what do you expect on the boards for Jaden Ivey?
I think 4 feels about right. I'm just never going to, unless it's Josh Hart or somebody, I'm never going to predict a wing or a guard's average more than 4. I think that's probably just safe. I could see it being higher for him because he's a really great leaper and he could average around 5, but to me 4 just feels a lot more safe.
Yep, I'm right there at 4 as well. I think that's reasonable with him. That athleticism, I think he'll continue to get better. I like him going to the defensive boards, grab a board. He can start the break, let Cade Cunningham get out and run. And then offensively, I think he could be, that's part of him playing off ball is being effective on the offensive boards as well. So I'm interested to see what he can do there. Assists per game. This is the one that's really interesting. So if we go back to Donovan Mitchell, 3.7, Dwayne Wade averaged 4.5 assists as a rookie. I think a lot of people would question whether Jaden Ivey is as good a passer as those guys. I've been higher on his passing than most people. I'm interested to see where you think he's going to be with his assists in his rookie season.
I think he'll be around 3.5. I think he's going to have games where he looks like a natural point guard. He's going to have games where he just has 5 turnovers and the defense is blitzing him, trying to make him as uncomfortable as possible. And he's probably not handling it as well. 3.5 feels right. If it was a little bit higher than that, I wouldn't be surprised by it. But I think his playmaking is going to fluctuate as the year goes on. So he has some games where he gets 7. He has some games where he has 1 or 2. And it probably just averages out to about 3.5.
I'm cool with that. 3.5, somewhere around there. I think the number that's probably going to be elevated is going to be the turnovers, right? I think the assists, I think he's going to get in the lane. He's going to create things. He's going to find open guys at times. Some of this comes down to who is he on the floor with? Is Cade making catch and shoot threes this season? But I think he's going to have some high turnover games, Omari, and he's going to have some frustrating plays at times. But I do think he's going to create opportunities where his assist number doesn't look too bad. So that's a rookie season for Jaden Ivey of 11.5 points per game, 4 rebounds, 3.5 assists per game. What do you think about that? You feel like that's a successful rookie season for the number 5 overall pick?
I think so. I think we are mostly aligned in the sense that it's going to be an up and down rookie season for him. I can actually see him starting the season slow. And I feel like every single year there's a rookie who starts off really slow and everybody's like, oh man, like the worst case scenario, like, this player sucks or whatever. Like it was Anthony Edwards, like Trae Young. Like every single year there's a player who's drafted in the top 7 or 8 who starts off slow. And after All-Star break, like something flips and they just play really, really well. So I can see Jaden Ivey being that type of guy. Like I can see him having a slow start and then around late February to early March, his numbers go up significantly. So this doesn't quite answer your question, but I can see his numbers being lower than what we predicted for like the first 2 thirds of the year. And then like that last third of the season, he just plays way better and it lifts his overall numbers up pretty significantly.
So as I add these numbers up, I'm at 70 points per game. Yeah, we went to 103 with these 9 guys. You still got Alex Burks. You still got KO. You still got Nerlens Noel. So honestly, Omari, there's a chance that even though I felt like you and I felt like we were on the low end, we may be high on some of these guys somewhere if we're at 103 with these 9 and we haven't included some of those veteran players.
True. I think the other thing, too, is that there's probably a chance we only see Nerlens or Duren and not both. So as the year goes on, you probably subtract whether Nerlens averages like 8 or 9 or we have 5 for Duren. You can just kind of eliminate that from the calculation entirely because it'll even out. But we may be a bit high. It's tough to predict because these guys are so young, right? It's not like it's the Lakers where you have like probably 85 collective years of experience between them. Ivy could come out and average like 18 a game and completely blow our prediction up, or some guys may slop, right? It's not a guarantee that Sadiq comes out and gets closer to 20. It's not a guarantee that Cade comes out and averages a lot more. He may just still stay around 18 a game, but just his efficiency goes up a lot, right? So fun exercise for sure. And some of these are definitely going to be way off, but it's odd because I feel like we were overall very rational and conservative, and yet the overall points per game is higher than you would expect. So
that's what I felt like as well, because and Wes makes a good note that Hami and Livers, depending on who ends up getting those minutes, you're going to have the same thing that you talked about with Noel and Duren. Also, how fast this team plays. They averaged 105 points per game last season, but if they're playing faster, obviously that's more opportunities and more chance to score the ball, score at a higher rate. So I think it also comes down to how many total points you think this team is going to score. But yeah, I felt like we were very conservative. I feel very comfortable with the numbers we threw out there, but then I add up that total and I'm like, man, were we being irrational here? So I don't think we were. I would love to know from our listeners. So leave us a rating and then in the review, drop it for a player, for multiple players. Hit us up on Twitter, in the comments, wherever you listen, wherever you can reach out to us. Let us know what you think for all of these guys or just 1 or 2 in general. I had a lot of fun doing this. I know Omari did as well. Take us home, my guy.
All right, thanks everybody for listening. Definitely give us feedback on if you think we're too high or too low on anybody. I'm sure most of you are probably like Omari and Bryce. We're dead on everything. We're 2 smart guys. And then there's probably like 3 of you who are like, these guys are dumb. And I'm going to send them a very nice tweet and tell them how wrong they are. So give us a feedback. We need it. We want it. Shout out to Wes, and big thanks to everybody else who helps us put our pod together. Our editor, Kerry Jr. II, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. And again, shout out to Wes, who we had on last week's pod, and we'll try to get you in here again before the season starts. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.